For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel.
Big question after you listen to something like this is asking yourself, why does the Iranians hate America so passionately to the point of chanting death to America? Does it mean that Iranians are just crazy, or they're just hateful and jealous toward the United States of America? Let's go back in history and find out, why does Iranians hate America so badly? It all starts with oil. It all starts in 1901 when the British explorers were given a concession by the then Shah of Persia to explore and look for oil in Iran. Just on a side note, it was still called Persia in the 1900s. It only changed its name to Iran in March 1935. So for the sake of this video, I will just call it Iran. But just remember that before 1935, it was still called Persia. In 1908, oil was found in Iran by the British explorers, and then the extraction started. The concession gave the British the permission to extract, process, and export the oil. In exchange, the Iranians would only get a percentage of the profits, which, to be exact, was 16%. The British would keep a huge portion of the profits. Iran didn't have any control whatsoever in terms of operation, in terms of access to their accounts, and in terms of the price of the oil. Typical of colonial Britain. These unfair conditions went on for a couple of decades to about 1951, when Mohammad Mossadegh became a prime minister of Iran. Because of this unfair revenue distribution and the lack of transparency by the British, the Iranians started agitating for change. In 1951, the parliament in Iran voted for nationalization of the oil production. So Iran nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and seized all the assets from the British, and the British were very angry because of this. This obviously led to legal battles between the Iranians and the British. Then the British went to the Americans to invite the Americans into the scene, because this was the time of the Cold War, when the tensions were high between the Americans and the Soviets. So when the British told the Americans that Mossadegh is likely a communist because of the policies that he is taking, so he is likely going to align with the Soviet, and the Americans, because they did not want the Soviets to have access to the Middle East or any influence, or the Soviets to have access to the Iranian oil, they entered the scene to avoid the Soviets having access to the Middle East. Then the American intelligence, the CIA, and the British intelligence, the MI6, carried out a coup in 1953 in Iran called Operation Ajax. Through a carefully planned mix of propaganda, manipulation, bribery, and economic sabotage, they managed to pull this off and overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh. He was a democratically elected prime minister of Iran, and they reinstated the Shah. Mohammad Mossadegh was kept under house arrest for the rest of his life until his death in 1967. And the big question is, where were they operating from when they were planning this coup? Of course, they were operating from the American embassy within Iran, which became their office. The American embassy would become a very, very important piece in the puzzle. Do not forget the American embassy, that when they carried out this coup, they were operating from the embassy. The Shah was reinstated, and he started doing the bidding of the West, and the people of Iran were not happy about this because they saw him as a puppet. The Shah was a dictator, basically. He did not allow any political opposition. He did not allow any voices to speak against him. In fact, he had a secret police which went around arresting anybody who says anything against him. This secret police, it is said to have been trained by Israel. Israel will come into this picture again. Remember, when the Iranians chant death to America, they also chant the same death to Israel. Here is how Israel will fit in. The Shah started allowing Western culture to influence and penetrate Iran. Women were even allowed to wear short skirts. This is the moment when Patrick Bet-David always liked to praise and say Iran was the Paris of the Middle East.
Iran, a country brimming with energy, exploding with construction and development, a dynamic state with a thriving capital.
But in any authoritarian society, there is problems of inequality, problems of human rights. And you need to remember, this is the United States of America backing a dictator who is abusing his own people. So if the United States of America is speaking about being a beacon of democracy and supporting democracy across the world, they don't really mean it. It's about furthering their interests, because whenever they have a dictator like the Shah, who was doing whatever they wanted, who was their puppet, they were happy to support him regardless of what he was doing. This police brutality and the crackdown of any opposition voices is what led the Ayatollah to be exiled in France. During the Shah's rule, it was post the Vietnam War. America was no longer selling as much weapons as they would have loved to, so they were coercing the Shah to buy expensive Western weaponry, draining already Iran's poor economy. To this day, we will all know that Iran's Air Force has the old American fighter jets, which were purchased during this time. Typical of America's military-industrial complex, you can see even to this day in 2025, the coercion continues to Saudi Arabia and Qatar to buy these expensive military equipment from the West. If there is no enemy to worry about, they will create one so that you can worry about your safety and end up buying their military equipment. The United States of America gained more influence in Iran at this point in time, including even in the oil business. The people of Iran started getting tired of the Shah, and they started protesting and rising up against the Shah. And the Shah tried his best using this police to silence and arrest people so that they do not raise against him. In some instances, the Shah sent his police to the protesters and opened fire towards the protesters, resulting in deaths and injuries. But this did not help the Shah. The people became more resilient and more determined to make sure that the Shah is removed out of power. Now we need to put this into perspective. The people of Iran are tired of the Shah. The Shah who was instated and imposed by the Americans against their will. And after all, they literally removed a democratically elected prime minister and imposed the Shah on the people of Iran. You would understand why, if they are angry at the Shah, they will also be angry at America, because the United States of America, a country thousands and thousands of miles away from Iran, is meddling into the politics of Iran. In the United States of America, these people, when Donald Trump stands there in front of the people and say, Iran has been chanting death to America for so long, he will never admit that it is because of what we did to Iran. With the fall of the Shah's rule comes in Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader, the father of the current supreme leader of Iran, not the current leader of Iran, but his father, flew in from France, taking over power and forming a new Islamic state of Iran. At that point, the Shah was ill of cancer and he was out of the country when his regime fell. When the people in 1979, when the revolution took over power in Iran, the Shah was out of the country seeking treatment for cancer. And when the news broke out to the Iranians that the Shah has been accepted into the United States of America for treatment of cancer, the people of Iran thought, maybe the Americans wants to nurse him and reinstate him back to power again. That is when the youths of Iran went and stormed the American embassy, taking all the staff at the embassy hostage. But remember, the embassy was the office, was the place, was the source of the coup of 1953. The people who were stationed at the embassy were the agents, the CIA agents, who ended up carrying out a coup. So the Iranians are not crazy when they go and storm the American embassy in Iran in 1979, because they were trying to prevent the same thing that happened in 1953, because they understood that the previous coup was carried out from the American embassy. That's why they went and stormed the American embassy and started burning American flag. And that's where the chant started, death to America. And this was basically the beginning of the hatred between Iran and America. A lot of other events followed after this specific event. Those other events we will discuss in the coming videos, including Israel, because Israel is also part of the list. When the Iranians chant death to America, they also chant the same thing, death to Israel. How does Israel fit into this situation? Now, in closing, we have to ask ourselves, are the Iranians terrorists? Are they crazy? Do they hate America? When they chant death to America, what does that actually mean?
They see video of Iranians saying death to America, describing our country as the great Satan. What is your opinion of that? Should we be afraid of Iran?
I believe that this is a very wrong impression that anybody might have of Iran or the Iranians. I would like to remind you that Iran has never invaded another country in the last 200 years. When they say death to the United States, it doesn't mean death to, they don't mean death to the people of the United States or even to the officials of the United States. They mean death to crimes, death to killing and carnage, death to supporting killing others, death to insecurity and instability. Iranian killing an American, have you ever heard that? Or a terrorist that was Iranian and he carried out a terrorist attack against the Americans? No, it was your president who confessed that the Americans created the ISIS in our region, and they were responsible for this wrong image that is portrayed of religion or the Muslims in the world. This is not death to the American people or to the officials. Death to crimes and atrocities, to bullying, to the use of force, and anybody who would like to become an accomplice in the crimes perpetrated by others.
We have looked at the history from where the relationship between America and Iran started and where it went bad. And we also saw in this history where the Iranians started chanting death to America. Most people see this event as the beginning of the story, but it is actually not the beginning of the story. It is the middle of the story. It is where the hatred started. So far with what we have discovered in this video, in this history, is Iran justified when they chant death to America? Or they're just a bunch of Islamic fundamentalists who are just extreme?